Number 8. Can Arslan. Sarah Boersman warned police that she was worried her neighbor, 52-year-old Can Arslan, would one day kill her husband, Matthew. The two families had been at odds with each other for years, and the tension only seemed to be getting worse. Things reached a boiling point, though, in 2021, when Arslan killed the 43-year-old father of three in a fight over a parking spot outside their home in an English village near Walton, Cardiff. Boersman was stabbed 27 times in his own front lawn by a crazed knife man, who also went after Sarah, cutting her leg before she was able to escape. After killing Mr. Boersman, Arslan sat on the victim's body and smoked a cigarette. He then forced his way into another neighbor's home and stabbed them 8 times. Neighbors testified in court that Arslan had made their lives a living hell for years before the murder. It reportedly got so bad that Arslan's landlord was almost about to evict him. Sarah Boersman accused the local police of failing to take any action, despite receiving many complaints about instances of verbal abuse and threats. Arslan claimed that his neighbors were the real culprits and that they were acting racist towards him. Regardless of whether or not the jury believed him, they didn't see it as an excuse to commit a murder. They convicted him of the charge, and he received a life sentence with a minimum of 38 years for his actions. Number 7. Clayton Carter III. A disagreement that broke out between neighbors in West Goshen, Pennsylvania during the early morning of August 8, 2017 ended in brutal murder. But there was a lot more leading up to it than one short, fatal confrontation. Around 7:00 p.m. the night before, police had responded to a call about a fight between 51-year-old Clayton Carter III and Brooks Jennings. The dispute involved allegations of video recording and cursing in one of their backyards. The two men apparently continued to go at it, and officers were called back to the home around 1 o'clock or so in the morning. During the events leading up to the second 911 call, Carter claimed Jennings had shined a flashlight in his eyes. By the time officers got there, things had escalated into physical violence, and Carter had fatally shot his neighbor. Police accused Carter of pulling into his lawn and flashing his high beams at Jennings before getting a handgun and firing the single bullet into Carter's head. Jennings happened to be a GOP committeeman, but prosecutors said they didn't think his political affiliation was a motive in the shooting. Instead, they blamed it on a long-running disagreement that eventually reached a fever pitch. During Carter's trial, they pointed out that the animosity between the men could be traced back through not only the weeks and months before Jennings' death, but years. Carter was convicted of first-degree murder and received a life sentence without any possibility of parole. Number 6. A family affair. Residents in Wicklow, Ireland were shocked to find dismembered pieces of a body scattered along a roadside back in mid-2017. At first, Gardaí, or Irish cops, believed the remains belonged to a male that was 25 or so years old. But a 32-year-old man soon came forward and claimed the body parts belonged to 61-year-old Patricia O'Connor. He even admitted to killing the retired hospital worker himself. The suspect, Kieran Green, was the ex-boyfriend of O'Connor's daughter and a member of her household. Detectives theorized he killed O'Connor as part of a long-running dispute and accused Green of fatally beating the elderly woman after tensions reached a climax. At the time of her murder, O'Connor had been estranged from her husband, Augustine Gus O'Connor, and had recently returned home in Ireland after living in the UK. She had lived in the house on and off for a few years. Gus, who also lived in the home, was later convicted of making a false report, since he reported O'Connor as missing when he knew she was actually dead. Green gave 2 stories about why he committed the murder. In the first version, he claimed O'Connor had walked into the bathroom while he was using it, hit him, and then demanded he get out, causing him to black out in a violent rage. He said that he didn't remember what happened after that. Despite his extremely convenient bout of amnesia, Green claimed he acted in self-defense and that he panicked when he realized she was actually dead. After burying O'Connor in a shallow grave, he returned to the site, retrieved her remains, and scattered her body parts throughout the area over the following days. 6 months after he was charged, Green claimed he was the fall guy for O'Connor's murder and that other household members had set him up to take the fall. But the court didn't believe the story at all and found him guilty of murder. He's currently serving out a life sentence. Several other household members were convicted in connection to O'Connor's death, including her daughter, Louise O'Connor, her granddaughter, Stephanie O'Connor, and Louise's new partner, Keith Johnston, who were all found guilty of impeding the apprehension and prosecution of Green. Regardless of whether O'Connor's murder happened after lengthy tensions or a disagreement that escalated quickly, it's clear her family helped in trying to cover up the crime. Number 5. Murderous mother and son. A marathon runner named Gary Dean had no idea he was putting his life at risk when he started running along a privately owned footpath in the English village of Silkstone Common back in 2016. The land had recently been purchased by the mother-son duo Carol and Scott Dawson, and for some reason they had a major problem with Dean using the trail for his daily exercise. Dean was an innocent, decent man who had a good life for himself, despite being on the autism spectrum, and he wasn't causing anyone harm. But his new neighbors weren't willing to tolerate him jogging near their property, so they tried to have him prosecuted for trespassing several times. The Dawsons even falsely accused him of trying to lure children into the forest, and more horrific things that were entirely untrue. Their feud soon became public, and locals were quick to take sides. Strangers who believed the rumors about Dean started following him and his wife around. The couple eventually secured an order of protection against the Dawsons, but it only seemed to escalate tensions. The ongoing war reached its peak one morning in 2018, when Carol and Scott waited for Dean on his morning run and shot him in the back of the head with an air rifle, and then beat him to death with rocks. A jury convicted the pair guilty of murder the following year. Carol received a life sentence with a minimum of 26 years, while Scott was sentenced to life with a minimum of 31 years behind bars. At their sentencing, the judge overseeing the case described how the Dawsons carried out Dean's murder with a brutal determination. He went on to say that Dean's behavior may have been somewhat antisocial, but the Dawsons killed a well-liked and harmless community member in a pathetic quest for revenge. Number 4. Landlord lashes out. When her tenant stopped paying rent for his room in 2021, his landlord, 61-year-old Ellen Wink, told him she was selling the house, so she had to move. Whether or not she actually planned to put her home on the market is unclear, but there's no denying that Wink was fed up with her freeloading renter, and she wanted him off her property. But the tenant, 54-year-old Kurt Lametta, didn't leave willingly, like his landlord hoped. After living in Wink's home for over 2 years, it seemed as though he had no plans to go anywhere else, and the two became caught up in a bitter back and forth as Wink's frustration grew to a breaking point. In September 2021, Wink was arrested for taking Lametta's belongings to a local dump and illegally locking him out of her house. The exasperated landlord was left with no choice but to let the tenant back in. The ongoing drama reached a shocking new level in early 2022 when Wink shot and killed Lametta at the property. She called 911 and claimed Lametta had attacked her while she was cleaning. At the scene, she told the officers her tenant had been driving her nuts. Wink was held behind bars for 7 months before she was freed on a bond. The case is ongoing, and whether the court sympathizes with her for being pushed past her limits remains to be seen. Number 3. Couple cuts up neighbor. A 59-year-old Israeli man named Shlomo Sami Marciano was brutally killed back in 2017 by the hands of his neighbors, who then cut up his body, put the pieces into bags, and buried them in a communal garden inside Jerusalem's Armans Hanatziv neighborhood. 2 witnesses reported seeing the couple throwing away some suspiciously bagged items around the same time a friend of Marciano's went to the police and reported him missing. Detectives connected the dots, which led them to 44-year-old Andrei Walchinsky and his wife, 44-year-old Claire Corbelli, as their prime suspects. The couple had moved from Russia to Israel during the 90s and were involved in a long-running dispute with Marciano. Walchinsky claimed that he had killed Marciano in self-defense, but that he didn't mean to actually kill the man. The suspect's lawyer, Ariel Herman, described his client's relationship with his neighbor as a very bad conflict that had lasted for many years. Corbelli reportedly admitted to helping dismember the victim's body, but denied participating in the murder itself. While the outcome of the case is unclear, both Corbelli and Walczynski were charged with murder and attempting to hide the evidence. It's easy to wonder if there could have been a less tragic solution to their feud. Number 2. Racist Rampage. Nurse and single mom Jennifer McCleggan moved into her home in Valley Stream, Long Island, years ago in 2017. It wasn't long before dog waste and dead rodents started showing up in her yard, and someone began routinely firing a pellet gun onto her property. McCleggan, who is African American, suspected her white neighbor, 57-year-old John McEnany, and his girlfriend, 53-year-old Mindy Kinarick, were behind everything. She endured a 3-year-long campaign of cruelty and intimidation at the hands of the couple, later telling the New York Daily News that they told her and other black residents in the area to go back to where they came from. The pair even threatened their neighbors with guns and wore blackface as a cruel way to taunt them. Authorities were well aware of the situation. In fact, they got used to responding to the many calls they received from McCleggan about the endless harassment. But it didn't seem like the law enforcement took their complaints that seriously. McCleggan became frustrated and eventually reached her breaking point. In hopes of making the situation hard to ignore, she posted large signs outside her home describing what was happening to her. One of the signs read, "My neighbors have been racially harassing me since I purchased my home." It contained a detailed list of the disturbing things that had become daily occurrences for McCleggan, along with the chilling closing statement, "I live in fear for my life." As word quickly spread, community members and activists came together and marched through the neighborhood to show their support for McCleggan and the other victims. McEnany was finally arrested after McCleggan bought a home surveillance camera and captured footage of his grotesque behavior. His girlfriend Mindy Kinarick was also charged in connection to the crimes. Kinarick agreed to undergo diversity and inclusion training in exchange for a 1-year conditional discharge. McEnany pled guilty to criminal mischief and was eventually sentenced to 3 years of probation. He had to complete anti-racism training, and the judge issued an order of protection banning the couple from any and all contact with McCleggan. Number 1. An unwelcome visitor decides to stay. The new Lifetime channel series called Phrogging, Hider in My House covers cases of unwelcome intruders making themselves overly comfortable in people's homes, unbeknownst to the homeowner's knowledge. In one episode, a Pittsburgh woman and single mother of 2 named Kate Flory described how happy she was to buy her own home in a safe community where she got along well with the neighbors. But strange things started to happen. Toilet seats were left up, even though no man lived at the house. Things were out of place, and Kate and her daughters heard strange, unexplainable noises all the time. A blanket the family didn't recognize even appeared in their basement. After realizing she wasn't crazy or imagining things, Kate did a thorough walkthrough of her house when her children weren't home. After entering one of the bedrooms, someone suddenly grabbed her from behind and tried to overpower her. She fought back though, freed herself, ran out the front door, and screamed at the top of her lungs for someone to help. Police arrived, and when they left the home with the perpetrator in handcuffs, Kate recognized him immediately. In an interview with the Frogger Show, she identified the man as Kari Kokutsi, someone she had rented a spare room out to months before. He had stopped paying rent, so she had to get a court order forcing him to move. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette told the story a little differently, describing Kokutsi as Kate's ex-boyfriend and saying that he had been forced out of the home through a restraining order. Whatever the case was, he was clearly very unhappy with the outcome of the situation and decided he was going to stay at the house, with or without the owner's permission. And while he managed to somehow hide in plain sight, it was only a matter of time before he and his former landlord or ex-girlfriend, or whatever she really was, came face to face. Regardless of the nature of their relationship, she had a right to be free of him, and he had no right to refuse to take no for an answer. He was convicted of 2 felonies and received an 18 to 36-month prison sentence for his crime. In the meantime, Kate has carried on with her life and now remains happy in her home. Thanks for watching. Have you ever had a situation escalate and go wrong? Let us know in the comments below. and remember to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.